All right. So good morning, everyone, and thank you to the Cat6A Foundation for inviting me to talk about the importance of patient registries in advancing research. So as Natasha already indicated, I am a senior program manager at NORD. I've been with the organization for about 4 years, and I primarily support the registry program. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about NORD. Many people have no idea who NORD is, so just want to introduce you to NORD, why patient registries are so important, and then a little bit about NORD's platform, what registries are, so that you understand the concept behind these patient-reported outcome measures, and then a little bit of introduction to the Cat6A registry, which has been around since 2019. So NORD is a grassroots advocacy organization. It's the national rare disease representative. It's the sister organization of Eurordis in Europe. And it was founded by Abby Myers because she realized that there was no support for the rare disease population. And so literally at her kitchen table with a bunch of other really dedicated individuals, she founded NORD. And with the mission to improve the lives of rare disease patients through several core programs. And you'll see how NORD has grown over the past few years. So NORD wants to make sure that the rare population is not forgotten in the space where patients as a whole need healthcare and advocacy and policies to be put in place for their well-being. So as a result of that, in 1983, the Orphan Drug Act was passed. And that was because of all of the work that Abby Myers and her colleagues did to ensure that orphan products could become available to the rare population. Prior to that, there were only about 34 drugs approved by the FDA. And one of the barriers to having these therapies on the market was the fact that pharmaceutical companies did not see the return on investment because rare populations are so small. They didn't think that it was worth it to create and invest in these therapies if there was no return on their investment. Hence the Orphan Drug Act, which ensures that there's no barrier. Pharmaceutical companies will invest in creating these therapies and making sure that regardless of if there's one patient, 10, or a million patients out there, that therapies are available if that is an option. So NORD's core programs, and I put research on top today because that's our main focus, but starting from the bottom up, the basis of NORD was to provide education to the rare disease population, provide support through education, information, as well as to medical professionals, the general public. Many people have never heard of the word or the term rare disease until they either have a loved one, a friend who has been diagnosed with a rare condition. So that was really a key part of a key foundation for NORD. And then through policy and advocacy, as was described in the Orphan Drug Act, and many other policies at the federal and state level, NORD continues to advocate for the rare population. And at a state level, and I'll talk a little bit more about this at the end, but at the state level, if you want to become involved as a member of the community, the Rare Action Network through NORD allows you to do to become involved with the regulatory advocacy portions of the rare disease population at the state level. Or patient services. So we wanted to make sure that there wasn't just education and policy, but what can we do to support those in need? And so whether it's having help with paying for medication, or if you need to go to a treatment site or clinical trial, there are all of these programs in place that will help patients to get the treatment and support that they need. Membership services. So just as NORD started with a group of individuals at the table, I'm sure Emil and Natasha can speak to this as well as David, you started off saying, we have to do something, what can we do? And you're not a formalized 501c3. And so you start working through that process and figuring out how can we become more formalized and a unified organization. And so NORD will help you through those processes. And once you've become that formalized 501c3, making sure that you have mentorship and you are visible in the space and you know how to really use the system to the best of your ability. And then finally, in the research space, we want to make sure that we can progress this work, right? We ultimately want therapies for all of these approximately 7,000 rare disorders out there. So being able to provide funding for translational and clinical trial studies is really important. We wanted to empower the patient population, hence the I Am Rare registry platform, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And then we want to disseminate this information through journal articles, conferences, posters, and just basic information back to the patient community. So we have a whole lot of stakeholders involved here. I'm not going to read through every single one of them, but throughout the course of this talk, you'll see how each of these stakeholders play a part in painting that whole picture towards therapies and support for the rare population. Before we can get everyone involved, we need to change the narrative, right? In med school, you're taught not to look for the zebras because med students will come back with the diagnosis that's the least likely. In the rare population, it's the opposite. If you've tried everything else and nothing's coming up as that potential solution, then maybe that zebra, that unheard of anomaly is what the problem is. So we're trying to make sure through education that more information is available during the training process for medical students and clinicians entering the workforce, making sure that they understand that it's really important to listen to caregivers and patients because you have to trust your gut. If something is off, then you really need to advocate for yourself. And then educating the general public. So making sure that you, that the information doesn't just stay within the rare population. We're already the experts in this area, but the rest of the world needs to know and to get on board and to help us with this whole process of raising awareness, of getting therapies available for the population. So we need to address these challenges for rare patients. And everyone knows that these are all things that you encounter either receiving a diagnosis or after you've received that diagnosis, trying to navigate the entire landscape. So again, I'm not going to read through all of these, but you know that medication costs a ton. Oftentimes it's lifelong medical needs. The medical experts are not there. And then once you're diagnosed, there's a sense of isolation. Am I the only one? Did anyone else go through this journey with me? What did their journey look like? So really trying to address some of these challenges. Additionally, through in addressing these challenges, I mentioned a little bit earlier that we want to advance this basic translational research. One way that NORD does this is through our seed grant program. And that's been around for about 35 years now, or 33, sorry, years now. And the basis of this is that we are in the rare space. So where there are larger organizations with much larger funding dollars, that doesn't necessarily trickle down to rare populations. And so through NORD's Rare Seed Grant program, we are able to provide startup money for research. And this is either for researchers who are fully dedicated to rare disease research, or those who are just entering into the space, very new researchers. But the fact is they use these dollars to provide some baseline trend data and use that as support for applying for more funding from places like the NIH and the FDA. We obviously want to collect data, right? Because without the data, we can't move forward. We need that supporting evidence. And then we want to help researchers to create more efficient clinical trials, not spending so much time in designing the study and getting to the point where you can accelerate these treatments and get to the approval process. So once we have this data, we can take this information to regulatory agencies and help to facilitate decision-making. Patients are absolutely empowered in this process to contribute their data. And I am going to, you'll see in a few examples later on how much power you have as a patient population. Many of you are keeping journals even before you knew what the diagnosis was. There's a lot of data that is held and information within these journals. So imagine putting that all together in a collective journal, which is the registry, and then having researchers and clinicians be able to view that information. And also for the general public to say, oh my goodness, my story looks a lot like your story, or this treatment, my treatment protocol didn't quite go this way. I wonder why. And it opens up that conversation for you to have with your clinician. And the other part of all of this is that we want to make sure that organizations have the support they need in building these research networks. So a little bit about the IAMRARE platform. And before I go into the overall overview of the platform, I'll just stop and tell you what a registry is. We've been mentioning natural history and registry. Well, natural history data follows the patient over the course of their lifetime and collects this information. So you want to see how that disease progresses. Within that registry, you can save all of this data. Now, to be honest, the first time I saw the word registry, I thought baby, wedding, like gift registry. And that is true. It is a form of registry. It's a collection of data. On a more specific and scientific research aspect, we are using these registries to capture information on a specific disease or diagnosis, to look at patient demographics, genetic information, your quality of life, medical reports, clinical trial matching, all of those types of things can be captured on the scientific side. In addition to all of that, there are two main forms of registries. There are contact registries, so that one focuses and more like a directory. So you put your name, your address, I'm interested in this. That's it. It's a one and done. You're not really putting in any more information. But that allows your organization to then contact you if there is anything of interest where you need to be involved, or you may be interested in being involved. Then there are patient registries. And on the patient registry side of things, there are two types. There's the clinician entered, or I should say there are three. There's the clinician entered, so all medical professionals are entering data into the system. Patients aren't really involved. There's the patient reported registry, so you as the caregiver or the participant is empowered to participate in the registry and to share your story, your journey. And then there are hybrids now, where clinicians are entering data and patients are entering data, and so it's a really nice complementary data set. So now that you know what a registry is, I'll tell you a little bit about the program and how we came to be, the IAMRARE program came to be. Way before I started, the executive team had a meeting with the FDA. NORD has a pretty strong relationship with the FDA. And NORD wanted to know, always thinking, how can we help the rare population? How can we progress research and accelerate treatments? And the FDA said, to be honest, we just don't have enough natural history data. So NORD said, okay, and they did a landscape analysis. realized that there were registries on the market, but none that adequately supported and empowered the patients to enter data and to contribute to research. So through input from FDA, NIH clinicians, caregivers, patients, NORD developed the platform, it's proprietary, and then launched the first registry in 2014. Continuing with FDA support, we received a cooperative agreement in 2015 to help scale up the registries, provided some support to patient organizations, and launched several registries in 2016. Fast forward to 2018, we checked in with the FDA again to say, this is how far we've come in the 4 years, this is what our groups are doing with the data, and this is what the studies look like. This is where we want to go. And now in 2019, we celebrated the 5th year. We received 4 federally funded projects where we were either the lead on the project or the primary partner. And then for 2020, we were able to receive funding from the Chan Zuckerberg Institute, very similar to the Cat6A Foundation. It's all about building research networks, collaborative research networks, and strong research networks, empowering patients and advocacy organizations to establish themselves as serious research partners in the space. And we also launched an undiagnosed rare disease natural history registry. This registry is NORD run, but in keeping with NORD's view of supporting the rare population, we wanted to make sure that even those without a formalized 501c3 has a voice and has a place where they can we represent over 40 conditions. We have over 11,000 participants across all of our registry partners and over 100,000 submissions. So this is survey submissions, and this includes participants from the Cat6A registry. So how is this data being used? I gave you a little snapshot of this earlier, but our registry partners are presenting this data at their patient and family conferences. One of the things that our groups say to us is that patients are not as excited about participating because they give their data, but then they never get that feedback. They never get any information about how was my data used? Was it useful? What was that outcome? So having this data to share back with the patients and families is great. Medical conferences is another one, webinars such as one today, not really talking about the data from your registry, but from the Cat6A registry, but talking about the impact that this data can have. And then patient-focused drug development meetings. We have had several of our groups have PFDD meetings, and they've used data from the registry to support a part of that meeting to make their case. Several of our groups have had journal articles published, presenting posters, community reports. So like putting out an annual report, they include information about the registry, and then research collaborations are coming from that. I'm going to take a couple of minutes to just give examples of how this data is using real time. One is, so medical conferences. One of our groups who launched back in 2016 from the FDA COAG agreement went to a medical conference. It's their annual OMS conference, or every 2 years rather. And his N number for participants and showing the data was over 100, compared to a medical professional who had been running a natural history study for, I want to say it was over a decade, and the N number for those patients was 18. The medical professionals were completely blown away because they couldn't understand where the patients came from. What's the motivation for their participant? How are you keeping them in the registry? And he had to explain that I'm as in the foundation is the bridge. They already trust us. They understand the importance of this. They're getting immediate feedback from the data. And so that started a whole conversation about how can we collaborate? How can we move things forward? And so now in the UK and at Boston Children's in Massachusetts, they are working on collaborative research networks to make this much more functional and efficient for patients and families, as well as the medical professionals. Another example of a research collaboration came from the SYNGAP1 community. So Bridge the Gap Research Foundation has a registry on the platform. Again, this is a testament to your keeping track of everything in your journals and diaries at home. And they were looking at the data and realized that there were a number of caregivers who were reporting that we realized that our child would be putting their fingers in the dog's mouth, or it took us 2 days to realize that our child had a broken finger. Like lots of these instances where the child had been hurt but did not respond to that. And so there is a researcher who from the University of Miami who said, I wonder if there's a link between what patients or caregivers are reporting and pain and sensitivity for the SYNGAP1 gene. So through mouse studies, he was able to establish that, oh my goodness, this actually is a thing. And this is not something that they would have ever thought to look at as a research objective, but because patients and caregivers were reporting on this, they then said, oh my, and they actually got a publication out of that, a journal publication out of data that came from the registry with the supporting evidence from the mouse models. So another example of this is last year, NORD in collaboration with 6 of our registry partners published The Power of Patients. These are case studies. So it has the patient stories and the actual data from the registry. What you're seeing here are posters that were also included in the book, but they were presented at several different places as well. But it really shows the strength of the patient voice. It puts that human touch and face in front of the data. And that makes a much stronger case as well for propelling the work forward and making sure that researchers are taking an interest and are advocating on behalf of populations in need. So where do you come in? I know I've been talking a lot about what your role is in all of this, but in much more stronger terms, your participation, your data can inform patient care and best practices. You can assess patient and caregiver experiences and preferences. We have one of our registry groups who included a caregiver because the patient isn't the only one who goes through the experience. The caregivers, as you all know, are very much affected and involved in the process. So that's really, really important to account for as well. It contributes to the overall understanding of the disease. And then it helps to identify research priorities, such as the example I gave earlier. And then you're able to have estimates of affected patients, potentially locally, so in the US, and then internationally. So people who wouldn't normally come together, they may join in this community, this collaborative research community. There are opportunities to evaluate individual and global economic burden of the disease. So that's an example of independent research that can come out of this. And then, of course, ultimately, we want to inform drug development and then provide avenues for additional work, such as through biospecimen collection. I will say that our registry does not have a biobank, but there is the opportunity for the organization to partner with either an academic institution or another biobank. So let's break it down a little bit now. How do each of these stakeholders benefit from this data in registries? So on the patient organization level, you really are being placed in a position where you are a strong research partner. Your voice is being heard, you're being taken seriously, because now you have research that's backed by a consent, backed by an IRB. It's not just something in your journal. As valuable as that information is, many researchers will not touch that information because consent was not granted for that. It provides new models of engagement. So you can find new people to engage with, new collaborators, whether it's in academia, whether it's a fellow patient advocacy organization that might share similar traits to that disorder or condition, strengthening existing partnerships, and then uniting divided communities. So the example for that is we have one group who, and this is something that comes to us a lot actually, there may be numerous patient advocacy organizations out there. And so there are competing priorities for a single disease. With that with a registry being in place, it's global. It's not, even if there's one advocacy organization who owns and sponsors that registry, anyone with the disorder is welcome to join. So it's not a picking of sides. This is a genuine uniting of your voice in order to enact change. And then, of course, it helps with your organizational roadmaps. So how are you going to use this information to build out the organization, to leverage partnerships, to begin to engage with industry? At the patient, family, and caregiver level, what does this mean for you? What are you getting out of this data? Well, again, immediately you have this sense of community because you are able to see, and if you are a member of the Cat6A registry, you'll see that once you've submitted your surveys, you get to see the de-identified aggregate data. You get to see how everyone else is responding without knowing who those individuals are. And so that gives you a sense of community. It gives you some drive, and it may even motivate you to continue to participate. It helps to support self-management. So you're able to track your symptoms in a more collective format. You can review your data at any point in time. Depending upon how the study is designed, it may be evidence for insurance claims. And then on an even more personal level, and another example I think of is for like the pediatric diseases, where I went to one of the patient conferences and they said, you know, every year I have to write out the IEP for my child. Every time he's switching classes, I have to go write that out. So if we have enough data in place to begin to provide some of these IEPs, some of these guides, it can become a standardized process that perhaps a packet can be developed where instead of patients and caregivers creating their own, there can be a ready-made packet that you download and you take to your educator or caregiver if your child is with special education. And then direct role in drug development. Ultimately, we want therapies, right? We want to make sure that no patient is left behind and they have the treatment and the help that they need for better quality of life. Clinicians, how do they use this data? Again, a really good example of this is that things that you wouldn't think about asking the patient, or patients might not even think about volunteering as information, can be really valuable in helping to create more targeted treatment plans, to track the progression, to help with transitions in care, particularly at the pediatric level, from pediatric to adults. That's something we hear a lot about as well, where, okay, my child has been with a pediatrician forever. They've been getting treatment at Boston Children's, but now they've aged out. What am I going to do? I have to start the entire process over. So trying to get ahead of some of these things is really important in ensuring quality of life and progressing the work that's being done in the rare space. And then researchers, the list is long. We want to make sure that you can validate and compare these experimental findings from patient-reported outcomes data. I don't think that if there's a registry that is clinician-run, it's clinician-entered data, that it is competitive. I think that the clinician-entered data and the patient-reported outcomes data are quite complementary. It actually helps to build a stronger case. You want to be able to explore new areas of a disease. Definitely applying for additional funding, because that's the funding is what makes the world go round in the research space. You want to inform drug development, ultimately get your regulatory approvals, validate measures. That's a really important one. We have lots of validated measures out there, but very few are targeted and adequate for the rare population. So creating measures that are more amenable and effective measures for the population is important. And then, of course, creating new research protocols from information that is available. For industry, we want to make sure they have what they need, as much support as possible in getting therapies to the market and as quickly as possible. We want to make sure that during these research processes, the patient population is not being pulled in many directions. So one of the things that NORD created was the sub-study feature, where, for instance, if the Cat6A registry had an industry partner, and industry had a specific set of research objectives, or academia, that study could be housed as a nested study within the Cat6A registry. It would be governed by its own protocol, separate consent form, but the research is ultimately coming to the patients, not the patients going to the research. And then regulatory agencies, approvals, 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 right? Making sure that they can help us to get much better guidance in place to accelerate and improve the research that's happening out there, provide best practices, accelerate outcomes for clinical trials. And then going back to transitions in care, I already talked about the pediatric to adult, but also in treatment protocols where there are no treatments, making sure that a treatment can become available or a new treatment can be introduced. Start-stop medication schedules, medication cocktails, what's working, what's not working, and then side effects, which is a really big one. There were studies that I worked on in a previous job, and there were cancer studies, and I recall interviewing the patients, and they said, the drugs work, but they make me so sick I don't take them. And so that's really important for us to listen and to try to address some of these things, because we want to make sure that they have good quality of life, patients have good quality of life, but also that the side effects are manageable and the drug is doing what it needs to do to treat a condition. So now just a little bit of a sneak peek at the Cat6A registry. This is your landing page. It's cat6a.iambra.org. You can join at any time. If you want to learn more, the Cat6A Foundation has a page dedicated to information about the registry with a link to join. And just a little bit more information, some highlights about the registry. Launched in 2019. So you've been around, you're coming up on your 2-year anniversary next January. Data is being collected on demographics, medical diagnostic and treatment data, quality of life, developmental milestones, therapies, symptoms and side effects. Emil is the principal investigator. And as we talked about registries earlier, this is definitely not a contact registry. It does function in that way, but it's not just that. We're collecting information on the natural history of the disease through your patient journey. And we want to make sure that you know once you've joined, it's voluntary, you can come back at any point in time. You can also withdraw if it becomes too much. But the important thing to note here is that it's not a one and done if you do join. You want to make sure to come back and keep sharing your patient journey so that we can see how things progress over the course of the patient's lifetime. You're not doing badly at all for registrations. You have 112 accounts created. You have over 2,400 page visits, 479 survey submissions, and this was as of last Friday. 103 of the 112 participants have consented. There are 81 active participants, so there are a good number of participants coming back and entering data into the system. And then finally, I wanted to just let you know that NORD is always available for support whenever you need it as an organization, as an individual patient or caregiver. And if you want to learn more about NORD programs, we have our upcoming Rare Summit, October 8th through 9th. We just launched NORD Pod, a podcast, which is really, really cool. The first 2 episodes went out. The first one was from Peter Saltonstall, our CEO, and the second from the CEO of the Mighty, and his name is eluding me right now. And I know it's Mike, but his last name is eluding me. And then there's a ton of information available on NORD's website if there are any questions that you have, including rare disease reports for a number of diseases and disorders. So if you have any questions at all about the registry, feel free to contact study staff at cat6aregistry@gmail.com. And then general inquiries about NORD or NORD's programs, please feel free to reach out to us at orphan@rarediseases.org or visit our website, rarediseases.org. Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you again to the Cat6A Foundation for inviting me to speak to you all today about the importance of patient registries in advancing research.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you.